Well, welcome everybody. I'm the Executive Director for the Cohousing Association of the U.S., Karin Hoskin, and Karen Gimnig, the Assistant Director of the Cohousing Association of the U.S., is here as well. We're so excited to be able to offer these web chats to you guys. If you have not had a chance, check out our website. It is super awesome. So the format tonight is that there will be a presentation and then some time for questions and answers. So for those of you that don't know Mac, hi. Mac Thomson from Heartwood in, I guess you're technically in Bayfield, yeah? Down in the Four Corners of Colorado.
Yeah, we're outside of Bayfield, outside of Durango. Yep.
Awesome. And he's going to be talking tonight about their annual budget process. After decades of doing this, Heartwood Cohousing has a pretty successful annual budgeting process in place. Ooh, and a secret weapon for arriving at a balanced budget that he's going to share with us. So I'm super excited by that. Welcome, everybody, and welcome, Mac.
Well, thanks. So what I want to do tonight is just try to share some of the stuff that we do, and hopefully some of it will be applicable to what your community might need, and just, you know, bits and pieces you might be able to pick up. I am a CPA in a former lifetime, but the way we do our accounting is a little bit unorthodox. So your structure is probably different in the way you do reserve funds and that kind of stuff, but the process that we go through, I think, will be applicable even if the accounting isn't just the same, and the process is what's really more important. Also, we're a rural community, and so we've got our own water system, our own septic system, our own roads, a whole bunch of stuff that shows up in our budget that might not be in your budget. But again, the particulars of the accounting are not what's important. It's just kind of how we go through the process of agreeing on a budget every year. I've lived here at Heartwood for 20 years. I was the project manager during our development, and I've been the financial team leader for most of the time in those 20 years. We've got a constantly evolving budget process, and so I'm just going to share with you what our current best practices are. Let me start out with, we've got this document. Let me see if I can make this happen. So hopefully now you're seeing on your screens the HOA reserves, budgets, and funds overview. And so that's a document that just shows all the different sort of funds that we keep money in, and then what each fund is for, how it gets created, how it gets funded, who has authority to spend from it, that kind of thing. And I'm not going to go over that whole thing, but I just want to highlight some of the main pieces that show up in our annual budget. So right here, can you see my cursor probably on screen share when I'm wiggling it around?
Yes.
All right. So team operating budgets, that's just, you know, an annual budget for each of our 10 teams, and they, you know, submit a budget request, and they don't usually change much from year to year. Contingency fund, that's something that our steering team has control over, and basically we just put an extra 10% in our budget that if some team has some unexpected you know, expenditure during the year that we hadn't planned for during the fall, then the steering team has the discretion to allocate money for that. We usually don't spend that whole 10%, but it's there if we need it. Extraordinary spending, that's for projects that don't happen every year, that are kind of unusual things. Like, for example, this last year, we rebuilt our whole big kids' play structure. So we had an extraordinary spending project just for that. So the various teams will make requests if they've got a big project coming up and they want funding for that. What else? Team reserves. Those are reserves for things that, again, happen less frequently than every year. So that'd be like maybe replacing the common house roof. or replacing the chlorinator in our water system or something like that. And so the teams, periodically, I'll ask them to look at their team reserves, and they'll make sure that they've got, everything listed, and that the amount of money they think it's going to cost to, replace that, the common house roof is the right amount, and that the number of years that they're expecting it to last looks like the right amount of years. And our team reserves are between $500 and $10,000. So if it's too small, we don't bother setting up a reserve for it. It just happens out of the team's operating budget. If it's too big, then we put it in a planning reserve. And the difference there is that anything in a team reserve, the teams have authority to spend. That money's already set aside. They've got the authority. If they need to do something, they just go ahead and do it. Whereas a planning reserve, that's the other piece I want to just highlight. That's where we're saving up money, usually for something big, something bigger than $10,000. Like say we're going to replace the tractor and we expect that to cost $25,000. So we'll save up for that over the years. And then when the pasture team thinks we need to buy a new tractor, they'll have to ask the community for authorization to spend that money. Because some of our planning reserves, like if we're going to drill a new well, that could be $100,000, and we don't want a team just spending that money without kind of coordinating that with other big spending that might have to happen. So that's just kind of that overview. All of these pieces that I'm going to show on the screen are in the PDF that you could download, and so you can look at them in more detail. And I'll also mention, if you want to, I don't know if you can get a hold of me through the the downloads or the website or whatever, but anybody's welcome to ask me questions later as you're looking through these downloads, as you get into some of the details on them. Okay, so that's kind of the big overview of what our structure looks like. And now I'll talk a little bit about what our annual process looks like. So in August, so I just did this a few weeks ago, I will send out to each team a team operating budget worksheet. And I just kind of roll out the whole budget process with an email, and I tell everybody, okay, here's your worksheets, your team's month, go ahead and get together and figure out what your budget is going to be or your budget request is for 2020. And I give them the last, whatever that is, 9 or 10 years, 9 years, I guess, of actual data, the average of that, and then what their budget is for the current year. And then they fill in the pink boxes. So they put in what their request is for the coming year. So those all get submitted by September 20th, theoretically, if everybody's playing nice. Then I'll aggregate all the budgets. And then also at that time, they have to submit their extraordinary spending requests, if they have any of those, and any new planning reserve requests. If they think, oh, we're going to have to replace some major part of our, septic system, like a whole brand new septic field, then that would be a new planning reserve request. So all those pieces are things that we consider in the annual budget. So those all come into me by September 20th. I aggregate all those and then put together, like a profit and loss statement, a budget basically, and see, if it balances or not, which it never does. And then if it's really out of balance, then I'll go back to the teams and I'll kind of work with them, and I'll say, well, when you're building those, new outdoor raised beds at the greenhouse, do you really think they're going to need to cost $1,500? Maybe, we could knock that down some, maybe, and we can maybe, tighten things up a little bit at that point. And then we're usually still, somewhat out of balance, and I'll prep materials for the first community meeting that we have for the budget. Those usually start in mid-October. And this last year, we actually got done with only one budget meeting. The year before took several budget meetings because we were way out of balance and we had to do some real, head scratching. So then when let's see what else. I'm just looking at my notes here. So I will, distribute that on email ahead of time. Oh, this is kind of an important piece. So I'll lay out where we're at with the budget, and I'll highlight areas that I call, juicy budget topics. And those are, like if any new extraordinary projects always fall in that category. If a team's operating budget has changed significantly from year to year, which doesn't usually happen, but if it does, I would highlight that. And basically, I would then invite community members. I'd say, in all this budget stuff, if there's any pieces that you think are kind of hot topics, you need to post to the community chat, via email ahead of time and say, this is a topic I want to address during the budget process. And the reason that piece is so important is that in the past, we'd get to these budget meetings and people would start bringing up, well, do we really need to use, a dumpster? Couldn't we start, doing something else? Or, all these different kind of spurious ideas would come up, and it would kind of derail the process a little bit. So this is a piece of homework that requires people to, think ahead of time, do a little work on it. We can kind of do some work on it before the meeting. And then we only consider at the meeting items that have been previously identified in email before the meeting. So that really helps us focus in, because if we looked at every element of the budget, each team has about, 5 or 6 line items, and we've got all these extraordinary projects, and we've got all these planning reserves. I mean, we've got 100 different things we could talk about. And so we could be there for months. So this really helps, focus the discussion. So then when we get to the first meeting, what I then have prepared is this next piece, hopefully you'll see now. And this is like a information sheet that I hand out. And I actually post it on email ahead of time. And then at the meeting, we'll go over this. And this will change, several times. So like this one is draft 2 from last year. But I might, get up to draft 5 as we start, working through this and coming up with the details. Let's see. So within this, it's got hopefully a distillation of all the vital budget information that people need. And again, the stuff that's highlighted in yellow, those are the things that are considered the juicy budget topics that are kind of on the table to talk about. And so like here, if you look at the overall budget summary, this box, this shows that we started out with a budget that would have had, 68,000 in assessments, all these various other types of revenue, totaling $76,500. And then we had all these various budget requests totaling 94,000 almost. And so we had like a $17,000 deficit. And so our job within the budget meetings is to figure out, okay, how are we going to, balance that budget? And column B was a scenario that I identified in terms of how we could balance the budget. And, so we would discuss, and basically what we do is in this kind of, secret weapon thing, how we balance the budget. What we do is we just explain or talk through, these highlighted areas, the juicy budget topics. For example, our common facilities team wanted to spend money on a new fire hydrant for the west end of our cluster. So That was going to be $6,500. So the only discussion we'll have is explaining what the project is about, and then maybe some pros and cons of doing the project. But we won't decide, are we going to spend that money or are we not going to spend that money, in that moment. We just want everybody to have a good enough understanding so that they can, and this is the part that we've instituted within the last few years that's been really, really helpful. And that's the idea there, is that we give everybody a little sheet of paper, and it's called My Balanced Budget Worksheet. Let me move to that. And I got to reframe it a little bit. So what we do is we hand this out, and everybody gets their own copy of it. And this is kind of the secret weapon that has really been effective for us. And so up here, I start out at the very top with the current deficit. So we've got a $17,000 deficit. And then people can, if they want, they can reduce assessments. They can say, we want to collect less dues. And if they do that, then they put that number in here. Let's say they want to reduce assessments by $2,000. Then they would add those two numbers up, and the total deficit to bridge would then be $19,100. Because if you reduce assessments, obviously you're going to have a bigger deficit than what we started with. So then whatever's in this purple line here, then they have to go through these various possible budget balancing items and put a number in, for each of these items, like here, 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 here. And they've got to come up with, well, if they put 2,000 in up here, then, and they have 19,000 up here, they'd have to come up with $19,000 worth of savings. So they fill that little worksheet out right at the meeting, and it's usually near the end of the meeting. And so then I collect them, just as people are leaving, and I make sure that whatever's in this purple box equals this purple box, because everybody's got to create a balanced budget. And so that, one of the reasons that's so helpful is because people can argue, well, we should spend money on this and we should spend money on that, we should spend money on that. But the reality is we have to come up with a balanced budget. So this forces everybody to make those hard decisions. How would I balance the budget and do that? So then I'll collect all these sheets, and then I'll tally them up, and then share the results of that with the community. And from all those various sheets, I'll kind of take a average of what everybody said and kind of massage it a little bit. If only a couple people said, for example, like with that fire hydrant project right here for $6,500, if two people said, nix the fire hydrant project, I can't just average and say we're going to spend, 90% of the money on the fire hydrant, because you either get a whole fire hydrant or no fire hydrant. And so, I'll throw out, if there's only a couple of votes, for one thing, and things that can't really be averaged, I won't average them. But then I'll come up with, basically by aggregating, a balanced budget. And then if it was pretty straightforward, there wasn't a lot of hard compromises in it, then we would go right to a posted decision. And what we call a posted decision is a decision that we make via email. And so I would just post the proposal right to email. Or if there was some kind of tricky compromises or whatever, things that seemed worth discussing further, then we'd have another community meeting and discuss it further. Let's see. So I think that's about what I wanted to present. In the, the additional things in the handout are the email that I send out at the beginning of the whole process that I just sent out this past August to introduce the process, the template that teams fill out if they have an extraordinary spending request, the template teams fill out if they've got a planning reserve request. And then this is the post a decision proposal that comes at the very end of the process where, you know, based on all this work, here is the budget proposal for next year. And then people, you know, can vote on that via email, just like they would do at a meeting. And within that, the very last page shows the aggregation of those My Balanced Budget, you know, worksheets. And so people can see how I arrived at, you know, the proposal amounts that I arrived at. So I think that's the end of the presentation part of your program this evening. So ready for questions?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
I love the My Balanced Budget worksheet idea. So have you guys always had that as a part of it, of your process?
No, we just started that a few years ago. We used to do sticky dot voting. I don't know if you're familiar with that. You know, where people can say, well, we should save money here, we should save money there. And it was kind of based on a balanced budget idea, but having them have to fill out the worksheet really narrows it in. And then people had a lot of trouble transferring the information from the worksheet to the sticky dots. They'd get kind of mixed up how that works. So we got rid of the sticky dots altogether and just went straight to the worksheet a few years ago.
Okay. All right, what other questions do people have?
I've got a couple. Yeah, there's a lot of resonance in what you're doing to what we've been doing. Let me just think about the order of my questions. So, well, I'm just going to get the last one off my chest. It was very distracting. I heard you say vote by email.
Right.
I mean, we, and I know a lot of other communities have kind of put a bold boundary around having voting happen via email. What does it happen with other decision making? Or I mean, what has it that it's specifically focused, if it is, just on finances?
It can be any decision. We make decisions either at community meetings or via posted decision proposals, and that means via email. And a team can kind of decide what they, I mean, usually if you go for a posted decision proposal, you have a pretty good idea that it's going to pass.
Right.
That the discussion has already happened at a community meeting, or it's kind of a real minor thing. Like if somebody drops off the steering team and somebody else is going to take their place, you know, that officially takes a community decision. So, but nobody ever objects to somebody volunteering to be on the steering team. You know, so
really?
It's usually, well, rarely, I should
Yeah.
say. But it's usually when the decision is pretty likely to come out right, or, you know, come out, you know, as a, you know, a proposal that passes.
Right.
And then if we do run into, you know, somebody that red cards a proposal on email, then we'll usually take that to a community meeting so we can resolve it there.
Right. Okay, cool. I have a couple others, but maybe somebody else can go next. Well, there's a comment in the chat. David is asking if you could go over the draft 2 document, the one with the 9 tables. I don't know what you means by go over it, though, because you kind of did, but.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can share my screen again.
Detail. It might be something that you guys can do together. Yeah, there is a lot there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can just kind of say briefly what each box is about. Come here. There we go. All right. So process summary. This is where I kind of track from meeting to meeting with people. Like, here's where we're at in the process. We call the person that's presenting a topic or shepherding a process the topic guide. And so as a topic guide, we always try to kind of lay out the whole roadmap of, this is, where we think the process is starting, and this is how the steps we think we're going to take. And right now we're kind of on this step. So that's kind of what the process summary does. Big overview of the whole process. The overall budget summary, I kind of talked about that. That's the entire budget, summarized into big chunks. Assessments. We do assessments based on number of people living in a house, which I think is very unusual. So I reflect in this box how much assessments would be for each size household, a household of 2 people, a household of 3 people, a household of 4 people, so on, for the coming year. So people, because that's what is very important to people. So that shows up there. Balanced budget possibilities. Those are just things that have been identified as areas that are most likely places that we can, either change the way we do some accounting, because we're paying ourselves back for internal loans. We're funding certain reserves. We can kind of play with those things a little bit. Those are accounting changes that could balance the budget. And then the other category is cost cutting that could balance the budget. And that's we're not going to buy that fire hydrant after all. So that's actual savings. So those are budget balancing possibilities. Extraordinary spending requests. That's just the summary of all the extraordinary spending requests for the year. So last year we just had 3 of those requests. All reserve balances. So all of our cash, we had at that time last year, $183,000 in cash. So all that is broken up into different reserves or funds. And so this is a listing of the breakout of all that. The planning and team reserves, so that shows all the various planning reserves that we've got, and a summary of team reserves. Source and authority, that's a real small summary of, how, who has authority to spend different money, so the team operating budget, the team has the authority to spend that. Extraordinary spending, the team has the authority to spend it. Team reserve is the team again. Operating contingency is the steering team. Planning reserve, non-reserve savings, and extra assessments, that's all community authority necessary. And again, that's important to really have that clarified so people know when they have authority to spend money and when they don't. It really, I think, builds trust in the community if that stuff is well defined, and people are only spending money that they're authorized to spend. And then the operating budget requests. So this just breaks it all down by team. This is the detail of, the annual operating budgets. So if you look here for, the total of the teams is 49,000. So that would end up being one line item up here in the overall budget summary. The operating requests are, the 49,000. So those are the main pieces that, we talk about at the meetings, and I put them on that information sheet.
David, let us know if that did not answer your question. I have kind of a little bit more random of a question. Do you guys do reserve studies?
Just internal. We don't hire anybody to do that. We just, like I said, some of our stuff is maybe a little unorthodox. And if you went to a CPA who specialized in HOA accounting, they might get nervous. But, we just, have all the teams look at all their areas periodically, probably every 2 years. and look at all the big pieces that they might have to spend money on and estimate what it's going to cost. And then we set up reserves for those. So hopefully that's adequate.
Well, you think you guys have been around long enough that if it wasn't adequate, you probably would have already felt the results of that, you would think.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and we've been surprised at times. I mean, we've had to drill a new water well because our other wells quit producing enough, and we didn't have a reserve set up for it. But we had enough other cash, you know, so that we were able to drill the well, and we had to, you know, borrow from those other reserves. We've done that internal borrowing a few times, and then after we get, you know, make that mistake, then we set up a reserve in the future for that.
Right.
But we've never had to do any external borrowing. And I think we tend to have a bigger cash balance than other communities. I was surprised. Pioneer Valley did a presentation at the conference in Portland, and they had a much smaller cash balance. But, you know, because we have our own water system and our own septic system and our own roads and stuff, you know, if something big in one of our, you know, in one of those systems goes out, that can be a couple $100,000. And so, you know, we're building towards eventually, you know, getting up to several $100,000 of, you know, cash on hand. And we're at about 2 right now.
Okay.
Speaking of the reserves, Mac, I thought I saw something on one of your slides that seemed to suggest that there was a smaller amount, that there was some kind of reserve activity that would kick in on a smaller scale, and that it seemed to give committees or teams kind of the flexibility without community, with maybe prior community empowerment to actually go ahead and approve a budget item or an expense. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're talking about. So the distinction is that we use, you know, the terminology we use is we have team reserves, and the team has authority once that reserve is set up to spend that money. So like the Common House team, they have a reserve for washing machines. So if one of the washing machines goes out in the laundry room, they don't have to consult with anybody. They just make a team decision. They spend the money and they get a new washing machine. And that's for less than $10,000. So if something's over $10,000, then we put it in a planning reserve, and then we ask, you know, the team to, you know, get community authorization to spend that money.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, we try to delegate as much as we can to teams and let them, you know, manage their areas of responsibility. But for big purchases, you know, really big, over 10,000, then we want to make sure that, you know, we're coordinating that. I mean, if a few teams each decide to spend $100,000 at the same time, we'd be out of money. So.
So just checking in on your terminology. So assessments are monthly amounts, true?
Yeah, monthly dues, monthly assessments. Yep. Yeah, so ours tend to, well, yeah, so for this year, they range from $119 for if it was an empty household, which we don't have any empty households nowadays, up to, well, $450 for a household of 6. We don't have any that big either right now, but it's basically like 100 to 400 is our range.
What is the range of square footage in your community?
Well, we've got probably much bigger houses than other communities. I mean, I've been to other communities and they're itty bitty condos, a lot of cases. And our community does not take care of houses at all. You know, everybody is responsible for taking care of their own house. But our houses probably range from about 800 square feet to 3,000.
So calculating your monthly assessments per person makes sense, because what stuff is included in those monthly assessments? Is that like your septic system leach field, your water, your well, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and ours is based half on a per unit basis and half on a per person basis.
Okay.
So it's not, so a household with 2 people doesn't spend twice as much as a household with 1 person, but they spend somewhat more. But yeah, we've got, I mean, the teams are, well, common house team, that'd be the normal kinds of expenditures there. Land stewardship, we do fire mitigation and landscaping. Fire mitigation is probably where we spend most of our money there. The pasture teams, fencing and seed and equipment rental and the tractor and all that. Garden and greenhouse, common facilities, and that's road, water, sewers, hot tub, on and on and on. They get a whole bunch of stuff. Process and communication has very little budget. Membership has not much budget, but that's marketing stuff. We unfortunately don't have a waiting list, so we spend money on marketing. Celebration doesn't have much of a budget. Finance, that's a big budget. That's mostly insurance. Steering team has a small budget, and then contingency. So those are our main categories for operating budget. But a lot of it, you can kind of make the argument that it increases based on a per person basis, like the amount of times that, that people use a dumpster or water or septic is based on number of people. But, plowing the road, you got to plow the road whether 1 person lives in your house or 6 people live in your house. So that's why we kind of, use the combination formula.
What other questions are out there?
I have one about timing. I think your first slide showed, and maybe some of the dates in your bundle of documents showed, and maybe you spoke about it, was started in August, this conversation with the community, or?
Yeah, in August is when I send out the team's budget worksheets.
Okay.
And I give them basically a month. I say by, September 20th, have this work completed and submitted back.
And your balanced budget sheet kind of community contribution happens when?
Well, the community meetings start in October.
Okay.
And mid-October, and then the final, meeting is probably the one where we do the balanced budget worksheet. And last year it was all the same meeting. We were able to do it all at once. But the year before that took about 4 meetings or something like that. So it varies. I mean, we try to get it all done by the end of November,
right?
And definitely by the end of the year.
Why do you suppose it took so many more meetings some years versus others?
Oh, because we had things that were, we were way out of balance.
The juicy things.
Yeah. And we didn't have any real easy answers for how to reduce it. We had some teams asking for stuff that, I think they were asking for, too much money for some things. And so we had usually teams get approval for what they asked for, but yeah, I'm not. So we just had some, I think, more contentious items that we were trying to work with that year.
Mm-hmm.
I have a comment. Dean Smith from Sunnyside in Washington. We're just a farming community, but I'm very impressed by your system. And I certainly will keep this PDF and use it as we get going here. This is very, very useful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So Mac, do you see many people using the donations to and increasing the assessment amounts?
Not too many people make donations. Every once in a while, somebody will. And increasing assessments. I mean, some people vote for that, but not many. I mean, it's pretty hard. We try to be an income diverse community. And so for some people, paying more assessments is like, yeah, that's the easy way to solve this. And then we can get all the stuff we want. But they recognize that that would be a real, challenge for some of the neighbors. And so people are really good about, respecting that and trying to figure out ways to, make the budget work without increasing assessments.
Personally, I was kind of giggling to myself when I saw that because the individual donations, because I thought, oh, that's like reverse psychology. Okay, so if this is what our budget is, and you can't help figure out where to cut costs, then you have to pay more.
Right.
I was like, oh, that's good. Like,
I mean, it is an option. We have had people make donations.
The solution.
Yeah.
I'm curious, David said that they're part of the forming community as well, and I'm just curious where are you in the process? Like, are you starting to create the budget process, or have you already done that, or? Very early. Perfect time to create a budget process.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even think about this stuff until after we were moved in, for a year or so. I mean, we had all kinds of budgets during development, and we funded our community, from development process or profits for a couple of years before we figured out, we better start charging assessments, and we better start, transitioning from a development company to an HOA.
Other questions? Neil, did you have another question?
I think not.
Okay.
I crumbled up my Post-it. I think I got all of them asked. No, I don't, Karen.
Well, again, if anybody has any questions as they kind of go through all the information on the PDF, you're welcome to, shoot me an email. My email address is macthomson@mac.com, and that's MacThomson@mac.com.
And that's plugged into the chat. So
oh, beautiful. Okay.
Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, I was just going to say, in your presentation, there was a string of emails, and I was just curious: do you happen to know, is one of those emails what you would send to the community with my balanced budget worksheet?
Well, the balanced budget worksheet gets handed out at a community meeting.
Okay.
And so that's not in the email. There was basically just there was the two main emails in there were the first one kind of introducing here we go, it's budget time, do your homework. And then the last one was, okay, we did all our work. Here's the proposal, and here's a summary from all those My Balanced Budget worksheets. Okay.
You can tell I'm very hip on my balanced worksheet thing.
Yeah, well, that's the secret weapon.
Yeah.
That really helped us.
And there was another question that surfaced. Is it Layla or Lila? Just asked two questions, actually. One is just to confirm, so you don't base any of the dues on square footage? And then she followed up with, how many households do you have?
Yeah, well, we have 24 households, and no, we don't base it on square footage at all because the HOA budget doesn't pay anything for taking care of houses. So I think, most, condominiums, associations would have financial responsibility for taking care of, the units. And so basing it on square footage makes probably more sense in that situation. But in our situation, one person can live in a 2,000 square foot home or an 800 square foot home, and those two people don't cost the community anything different. So yeah, so we don't base anything on square footage.
Any other questions or comments for Mac? Any other words of wisdom for us right now, Mac?
No, I don't think so.
Create a budget, stick to it.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, the steering team asked me a couple of years ago, to put together some kind of a backup plan. Like, what happens if Mac gets hit by a truck? How are we ever gonna, figure all this stuff out or whatever? And I said, well, my main legacy is going to be if we just have enough money in the bank, then somebody can make it work. And so that's kind of the key I've been stressing here is let's just keep building enough reserves, and then we'll be okay.
Henning had a question. How long was the process of coming up with this way of arriving at budgets? Like you said, the first couple of years you didn't really exactly use a budget, or you kind of did.
Well, we didn't. I mean, the first couple of years we didn't charge dues. We didn't really, have the HOA, and the HOA just was born with a couple $100,000 in the bank from profits from the development. And so we just spent money. We didn't raise any money. And then, but as soon as we started doing assessments, then we started doing a budget process. So, I mean, this has been going on for 20 years. And so, and it just slowly has evolved. And I'd imagine that if I gave this talk 5 years from now, there'd be, some other new way that we do things.
All right. I'll have Karen schedule you for that future web chat. Okay, anything from anybody else? All right, then, well, I will just remind everybody that, well, thank you for being here. Mac, thank you so much. Henning, I'm not sure that noise came back, so I just muted you. So you'll need to unmute yourself if you had a final thing to say. In the meantime, what I was saying was what? Oh, the Mac's presentation here, the PDFs will be uploaded on the Coho US website with the web chat recording. Once the recording is processed, it usually takes about 24 to 48 hours or so. And then I just wanted to let everybody know that the next scheduled web chat, I believe the next one is Wednesday, September 25th, same time. And it is Sky Blue, the executive director of the Foundation for Intentional Communities, and Avi, I'm not sure if it's Crewley or Crully, I'm embarrassed to say. They'll be talking about more what is it? The transformative impact of intentional community. So that should be really interesting. So the WebChat schedule and past recordings are on the website under web chats.
I just wanted to say thank you, Mac. It was a wonderful speech. And
yeah, well, it's really been my pleasure to do this. So much of what we do here at Heartwood are ideas that we've gotten at national conferences and from other communities. And so, if we can give back just a little bit, makes me happy.
Absolutely. And it's something that I think is really important for everybody, no matter where you are in the co-housing process, whether you've been around forever or brand new forming, is that we do not have to reinvent the wheel. Like, everybody does things a little bit different because it's appropriate for their community or that time or whatever it is, but we do not have to start from scratch with stuff. So the Co-Housing Association website is a great resource, as well as the Co-Housing listserv is a fantastic place. If you are trying to figure out how to do something, post an inquiry and you'll get all kinds of amazing answers. Yeah. Alrighty, well, I'm gonna stop the recording, and thank you everybody for being here, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.